One of the most potentially satisfying parts of cinema is a great sequel. But I say potentially because it's also one of the most divisive trends today. When a new Hollywood movie comes out of nowhere and shocks an odd audience with a fresh and original idea, it's one of the most special feelings moviegoers can have. A completely novel experience that takes them on a journey, introduces them to new characters, new concepts, and entire new worlds that provides a sense of wonder and once again proves why cinema is such a special medium. And naturally, these types of sensational spectacles result in huge profits at the box office.
$100 billion!
Which is only pronounced by the fact that they're typically given small budgets by the wary studios that barely greenlit them in the first place.
$1 million.
And naturally, these studios want more of that sweet, sweet monetary success. But the problem is, studio execs are first and foremost artistically impaired, money-hungry, Slavic piggish culture vulture pariahs who think that IP recognition is what makes profit, rather than artistic merit mixed with creative ingenuity coalescing in the perfectly timed encapsulation and representation of the human experience. In short, studios want to capture lightning in a bottle as many times as they possibly can, and this can have very mixed results. Sequels usually suck, and they usually keep getting worse, which as a child could feel like a cold brick to the dick in a snowstorm when you grew up loving the original so much. But there's definitely some exceptions, and more often than not, it's when the integrity of the original filmmakers don't get compromised, and they typically receive a larger budget and are able to expand on the ideas, world, characters, scope, and lore to give us all more of what we loved so much the first time around. I absolutely love a great sequel, so I put together a guide to some of the best examples to try and help y'all remember some of the great movies, or direct you to some that I think you should check out. First off, a couple arbitrary rules I forced on myself so this list was manageable and kind of cohesive. This doesn't include remakes, even though there's lots of amazing ones like Dread or The Fly or absolutely not Johnny Depp in the Chocolate Factory.
The best kind of prize is a surprise.
I'm keeping this list restricted to only the second sequels, not the third or the fourth. So no, I don't know, like Nightmare on Elm Street 3? Sure. And also, I'm leaving out movies where the sequels are like only debatably or marginally better, which I know is pretty damn subjective, but that eliminates some great movies like Empire Strikes Back and The Two Towers. I'm also leaving out movies that are technically sequels because they're in the same universe, but are so loosely tied together they shouldn't even count. I'm looking at you, 10 Cloverfield Lane. Which incidentally was never even supposed to be a Cloverfield movie, but got some Cloverfield-ass alien bullshit thrown in at the end, and the name Cloverfield tossed in the title as a shameless ploy to make some money off of brand recognition, injected into a half-decent script about John Goodman stealing North America's food supply and trying to eat it all before they can find him in his fat wombat burrow. And finally, I'm leaving out sequels that aren't really better, but are completely insane departures, like Return to Oz, Highlander 2, and Rambo. Because that is 100% a list for another day. So without further ado, let's get started. I think the largest and easiest to define category of great sequels is what I like to call same but bigger. These are movies that don't really stray from the blueprint or lifeblood of the original, but essentially just give you a grander version of what you loved. And the quintessential example of this is obviously Terminator 2. Terminator 2 is probably the greatest sequel ever made.
Easy money.
And it's the go-to reference for a great sequel to basically anybody that still knows what an arcade is. Whereas the formula definitely gets switched up a bit in making Arnold the protagonist rather than the antagonist, I think it still fits into the same category. Because it's still Sarah Connor trying to escape a cold-ass literal killing machine. But this time around, we got bigger explosions, bigger set pieces, expanded lore, and more of the chilling future that we as humans seem absolutely dead set on making as we continue to develop staggeringly powerful AI, while simultaneously creating robots that can do backflips and shoot guns, android dogs that are one rolled-up newspaper smack to the shiny metal ass away from tearing our arms off, and battalions of synchronized drone squadrons that will one day equip themselves with turrets filled with robotic bees that can burrow into our brain and infuse microchips into our cerebellums that will instantly override and control our motor functions while leaving us consciously aware of the carnal horrors that we're forced to unleash onto our fellow man with our own bloody bare hands. Good thing this movie warned us, though.
You're already dead, everybody. You're dead already. This whole place, everything you see is gone.
Anyway, this one's pretty obviously just a great sequel that gave us more of what we wanted and some of what we didn't even know we could have. Perfection. More of the same but better are movies like Godfather 2, which gave us more meatballs, more monologues, more Pacino kissing dudes, and just more of all of the great. We've also got Aliens, which was like Alien, but with an S on the end, which stands for more than one alien, but also dollar signs. Famously, James Cameron was brought on to replace Ridley Scott as the director, and he took the pitch meeting on a lunch break. In that meeting, he wrote down the word alien, and then added an S on the end, and then made 2 vertical lines in the S to make it a $sign. And the producers went wild, and immediately greenlit the film. It can definitely be said that he switched up the formula, turning it from a horror movie with action movie elements into an action movie with horror elements, but it's pretty undeniable that the bigger set pieces and the more aliens made it into an instant classic with its high-paced action and undeniable gravitas. Another movie that took the original formula and expanded the world into a scope that essentially changed the tone of the movie was Mad Max 2, or as it was known in North America, Road Warrior, or as it was known in Australia,
It was Tuesday.
Mad Max 1 was a very rad and slick movie that hinted at a grander world, but Road Warrior effectively conveyed that greater landscape and really proved what world building was all about. Incredible set pieces, stunt work, practical mechanical builds, and exceptionally unique characters that all seemed to have their own implied backstories. The implied backstory is that there was a giant Australian fetish convention, but the country suddenly ran out of bags of economy-priced low-grade wine, and all hell breaks loose as the Marauders fight to establish dominance, as rivaling clans of leather daddies all fight over the final bags of goon in this desolate wasteland of open-air frat house known as Australia. Exceptional stuff. We've also got superhero movies that absolutely defied expectations and showed us how good a Batman and Spider-Man movie can be when you don't have to spend a large amount of runtime killing off the people they loved and can just focus on what they do best. Which in Bruce Wayne's case is essentially imposing the Patriot Act on Gotham because he couldn't handle the shame of Joker performing a sick kickflip over him and used his superpowers of hedge fund finance tech company prowess to take down all the skater punks in the city. We definitely gotta include X-Men 2 in this list for that Nightcrawler scene alone. And Deadpool 2 for taking what X-Men 3 did to the Juggernaut and making things right in the world again.
Thank you!
We've got Captain America 2, which is like Captain America 1, but like Jason Bourne 1, which is kind of like James Bond 23, which is kind of like Jack Reacher the remake, which is kind of cool, I guess. There's Superman 2, which is like Superman 1 without this goddamn scene.
I don't know who you are. Just a friend from another star.
Which makes it a million times better. Also, there's Across the Spider-Verse, which is a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. And I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the best movies ever made. It's actually a bit of an ongoing meme in my friend group that if you get me drunk enough, I'll legitimately argue it's the greatest thing humans have ever made. I'm not drunk right now, so I'm not going on that tirade, but it's definitely the amalgamation of over 60 years of human creativity and storytelling conveyed in the most stunning visual art piece ever produced. For all y'all's sake, I'm just gonna leave it at that. All these movies gave us everything we wanted from a sequel, while utilizing the time spared on having to convey the origin stories of the first movies, and gave us more epic scopes and introduced even more of our beloved childhood comic heroes. It really shows what the creative team could accomplish once they've established a roadmap with the first movies. They fully know what they're doing this time around. The audience is already oriented with the characters, and now we get to see these characters develop and interact and face new adversities and new adversaries. In a similar vein, we've got movies like Austin Powers 2, which again follows a familiar formula, but just ups the ante in every single way. Austin goes back to the 70s, which in itself is a great idea, and honestly, who would want to go anywhere past 1999? Ugh. We get Fat Bastard. We get the adorable dynamic of Mini-Me and Dr. Evil. We get a lot of the same jokes we loved, and we get a lot of new jokes that become instant classics and continued quotables to this day. The same could be said about movies like 22 Jump Street, which gets even more playfully meta and intelligent with its humor and setup. We've got Hellboy 2, which takes the established character and puts him into an even darker and gothic environment that slowly departs from a comic book movie and transitions into a wide-spanning epic fantasy by the end. And we've got Critters, which has tits, like really good tits. Not to mention a giant critter ball, Critters having an absolute blast in a cafe, and just more of the wacky fun that made the original so liked. We've also got films like Hunger Games 2, which is allegedly better, but who cares? We've got movies like Star Trek 2, which is for nerds, so who cares? Nah, I'm joking. I know the first one sucked and people loved the second one, but I don't really want to watch both of them because I'm too busy watching people speedrun Quake for Nintendo 64. Needless to say, I'm a pretty busy guy.
Damn, come on, be nice.
which neatly segues into the next category. Same, but different. I'm going to break this one into subcategories, because collation and categorization is what the people crave. Let's start with a simple category. Different settings. Pretty self-explanatory. Change the setting for the story and see what happens, like Ace Ventura 2. Whereas the original is honestly a fairly grounded comedy movie that's essentially a quirky detective thriller, the second movie takes an eccentric character and transplants him into another continent and into truly fantastical and almost nonsensical scenarios, which ramps up the character's craziness and kinda just lets the chaos flow freely. You can definitely make the argument that the first movie is a better adult movie, but it's pretty hard to deny that the second is a much better fare for kids and teens, and there's no scenario in the first one, let alone many scenes in any movie more memorable than a naked Jim Carrey birthing out of a rhino and flopping onto the ground like a wet baby gazelle. That's good stuff right there. We've also got movies like The Raid. The Raid is an exceptionally high-paced and well-choreographed movie that has a very straightforward, almost bare-bones plot, wherein almost the entire movie takes place in an apartment building, while The Raid 2 is, well, not in an apartment building. This expanded scope helps craft a more intricate and provoking plot, while still maintaining the frenetic energy and immaculate choreography that made the first movie such a great success. Next up, we've got Dawn of the Dead, which follows the trend of Ace Ventura and The Raid by utilizing a different environment to create a whole new tone and set of challenges and circumstances that helps the filmmaker tell a more complex story in the same world. In the instance of Dawn of the Dead, we've departed from the claustrophobic sense of desperate survivalism of the first film and ventured into an abandoned mall, wherein the characters are given more time to ponder their new lives post-zombie outbreak. Whereas the first is the instinctual reaction to the threatening situation, the second movie asks us what we would do after we've got our bearings. In this sense, it's more so a movie about adaptation rather than reaction. This allows for even more focus on interpersonal dynamics and social commentary, and it's probably one of the first cases of a screenplay comparing modern-day mall-goers to zombies. I'm sure today it would just be a bunch of zombie podcasters or something, but I can't really say much because I'm basically spending my free time alone essentially making a top 10 list of old movies in the hopes that people please go like and subscribe if you like my content, and don't forget to leave a comment below. Subscribe. Next up, we got a pretty interesting but smaller category. Similar, but with different characters. Admittedly, this is pretty much most horror movies because the protagonists often switch up in the sequels, or at least sit out for a sequel or two. I don't know, this is kinda an awkwardly put together category, but what I'm trying to refer to is movies like Friday the 13th, wherein the antagonist has been swapped out. What I like about this one is that it's not a forced change-up. Jason's mom did all the killing to avenge her son, and in the second one, it's the son who continues this venture. Basically just trying to kill the vibe of anybody trying to get freaky or high, which is ironically what a good camp counselor would try to do. Definitely a very similar premise, but enough of a switch up to warrant a mention. You can safely put Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in this one. Although it's technically a prequel, and it's pretty debatable whether it's better than the first or not, I think it's worth mentioning because it's quite infamous for just how much of a departure it was from the first. Even though Raiders got pretty dark at times, it's pretty undeniable the Temple of Doom is much darker, more violent to an almost distastefully mean-spirited degree, and overall comes off as a much more cynical fare. There's the iconic heart removal scene.
Ow! It's just raining. Little Clay, it's raining. You broke my heart.
A possessed Indy beating up Data from the Goonies, and a particularly annoying and stereotypical damsel in distress, just to name a few of the nastier attributes of the film. It was still meant to be a PG-rated movie, which is honestly pretty surprising even by today's standards, and caused a public outcry which actually resulted in the MPAA creating the PG-13 rating still used currently. Years later, it was revealed that the darker tone of the movie is literally a result of emo phases of both the filmmakers, as George Lucas was going through a bad divorce and Steven Spielberg had broken up with his long-term girlfriend. Probably why the girl in that movie sucked so bad. Just two sad dudes taking out their anger on poor Indy, Data, and women in general. Wild. Like I said, Temple of Doom isn't the greatest example of a good sequel having tonal shifts, but I'd definitely argue that Lethal Weapon 2 is. Not only does Lethal Weapon 2 have a much bigger budget, lots of explosions, and big destructive set pieces, it's got a marked departure from the darker brooding atmosphere of the first one, into a lighter, more comical narrative that focuses a lot on family bonds and super happy fun time stuff. The first dealt with Riggs' suicidal ideations and despairing grief following the death of his wife, but the second showed him recovering and becoming more lighthearted again. That being said, they definitely set up a new love interest for Riggs and kill her off in the latter half just to force him into the exact same mindset of the first movie. Which is definitely a little artificial and insincere, but at least captured some of the vibes that the fans of the first one loved. Next up, we got one of my personal favorites, Blade. And I'm not gonna lie, I definitely like Blade 1 better because it's so unapologetically 90s badass, but I have to admit Blade 2 is a better movie. As a kid growing up as a nu metal fan, it's kind of like how Slipknot is definitely technically a better band than Korn, but Korn is just so goddamn schlocky in its satisfying goth fodder vibiness. Hell yeah, I just found a way to relate Korn to Blade in essay format. 13-year-old me would be so proud. Anyway, Blade 2 is similar to sequels like Aliens in that it's a new director, Guillermo del Toro. And though it's not as fantasy-driven as Hellboy 2, or his other films like The Incredible Pan's Labyrinth, it definitely looks very different from Blade 1 and how it's shot. The movie honestly has better fight scenes and choreography, a larger focus on horror, specifically body horror, and a gang of really cool characters, and it's much richer in its exploration of themes. But I'm always gonna love my Matrix-esque ice skating uphill to techno music bumping Blade 1. The last category is definitely my favorite category. The director is going insane and just making a batshit crazy version of the original, seemingly for their own personal amusement, to the horror of the producers, and to the absolute joy of myself and many others. The first of these types of movies is Evil Dead 2. Goddamn Evil Dead 2. I love this movie. I love this movie so much. This isn't a takeaway from the first movie in which Sam Raimi maxed out credit cards, took out loans, and borrowed money from his friends to make his ultra-low-budget passion film and single-handedly creating the cabin in the woods genre of horror. It's visceral, it's disgusting, it's terrifying and gruesome, it's blood, pus, eviscerated body parts, and it's great. But still, I love Evil Dead 2 so much more. This movie is ridiculous from beginning to end. The beginning is particularly hilarious from a meta standpoint, as Raimi wanted to use narration over footage from the first movie to give a quick recap and set up the story where the characters and plot left off. But unfortunately, Raimi didn't expect the movie to do so well, so he sold off the distribution rights to the story and characters, so he had to come up with a solution. Well, he didn't have to, but he said fuck it and he did it anyway. He essentially simplifies and speedruns the first movie, compressing it down to like 5 minutes to set up Ash back in the cabin fighting the forces of the Deadites. No fucks given. What ensues is 30 or so minutes of Bruce Campbell going full schizo slapstick as he fights his hand on his body, then off his body, and then just gets tormented by the cabin in every way imaginable, ranging from comical to creatively ingenious.
I don't think so. We just cut up our girlfriend with a chainsaw.
To genuinely heartbreaking. This whole segment is absolutely incredible, and this is legit one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema. I could honestly go on about how much I love the practical effects, how this is one of my favorite movie monsters, how the foreshadowed ending is one of the most hilarious but satisfying twists in cinema, but this video would end up longer than the movie itself if I indulged. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is the legendary Batman Returns. My god, this movie is so good. Let's give some quick backstory to provide the awesome context. So the first Batman movie obviously did great at the box office, and the studio execs wanted to capitalize on the hype immediately with a sequel. But Burton didn't really want to do sequels, something he's maintained up until recently. But the execs were begging him to come back. He agreed, but only if he got majority of the creative control, which they conceded to, and he had the entire script rewritten and turned into a deeply gothic psychosexual character-driven macabre masterpiece that barely has Batman in it. And when he is in it, he kills people, hounds after Catwoman, reasonably, and basically plays supporting role to the infinitely more intriguing villains. Hilariously enough, this movie was released as a summer action movie blockbuster, but its setting is a distinctly cold winter environment plagued with a deeply oppressive sense of dread, abandonment, resentment, and pain. The only warmth this movie has is the fiery desire that both Batman and Penguin have for Michelle Pfeiffer, who literally had to be sewn and vacuum sealed into her skin-tight suit. Side note, This is one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema. The music mixed with the pain and the tragedy made me cry emotionally as a child, and tears me up in appreciation today. The penguin is a malformed monster that was thrown into a river by Pee Wee Herman flowing into a sewer in the beginning of the movie. He devours real raw fish with razor-sharp teeth, gnaws on a man's nose, steals all the firstborn children of Gotham, and eventually suffers a gruesome death wherein water itself poisons him as he bleeds odious green and black bile from his mouth as he falls to the floor in front of the only creatures that ever truly loved him. This is not a kid's movie. But as a kid, I loved this movie, and I think most other kids did too. But the parents were outraged. The movie set box office records on the opening week, but the public outcry and literal protest completely stunted further box office revenue.
It was very violent. It was a total attack against kids, the whole movie. Everything that kids love was being used against them.
Like what?
Clowns. Even the penguin had a ducky boat.
And companies like McDonald's pulled their tie-in product campaigns out of fear of supporting a kid's movie filled with death, child abuse, psychosexual torment, and generalized darkness and putrescence. That being said, it's one of my favorite movies, and I absolutely love the fact that Tim Burton went balls out to create the movie he wanted to make. All of this was possible because he was assured majority creative control, which segues perfectly into my next movie, Gremlins motherfucking 2. This movie is truly an incredible spectacle. Like Burton, Joe Dante, the director of Gremlins 1, had absolutely no desire to return for a sequel. In fact, he had a very strong aversion to the idea, as the production of Gremlins 1 was apparently a nightmare. But more importantly, he felt that the movie ended properly and definitively, which it honestly did, and he felt that a sequel would be nothing more than a cash grab, which it absolutely was on the studio's part.
They spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to make another Gremlins movie, despite the fact that they hadn't understood anything about the first Gremlins movie, which was a surprise hit to them, and they couldn't understand how that happened. But finally, after a lot of expense and effort had been spared and lots of writers writing things that didn't get shot, they finally came back to me and they said, well, you know, we realize you must have had something to do with the first movie, so tell you what, if you'll give us another Gremlins movie this summer, we'll let you do whatever you want.
Not majority creative control like Burton got. Full creative control. The studio agreed, but goddamn did they regret it. Dante set out to make a completely satirical jab at sequels in general, including sequence-breaking intermissions, full monologues dissecting and mocking the lore and rules established in the first film.
Look, I didn't make the rules, okay? Rules? I don't believe this.
Oh, wait a minute. What about this? What if they're eating in an airplane and they cross a time zone? I mean, it's always midnight somewhere.
And multiple slapstick moments. Not to mention hundreds of Gremlins having an absolute blast for extended periods of the film for zero narrative reason. He transformed Gremlins into scholars, spiders, Batman, lightning, vegetables, and famously, an absolute babe named Greta, who ends up seducing Robert Picardo. The Gremlins destroy elevators,
Sound alarm.
host talk shows, attack their own movie critics,
Attack innocent people. Our moviegoers so desperate for entertainment, this kind of trash and cast for fun. Whoa, wait.
invade Western movies, perform a musical,
Start spreading the news.
and basically do anything that Joe Dante thought would be hilarious. And it truly is. The Gremlins absolutely steal the show, and honestly keeps me laughing throughout the whole second act. That being said, Gizmo's arc from terrified victim of the Gremlins to self-assured Rambo-based hero is actually incredibly harrowing, and the giant spider gremlin terrified me as a kid. And the sequence breaking was so unique and captivating for my young self. I didn't know movies could do stuff like that, because honestly, they're never allowed to. As mentioned, producers were choked, but critics were pretty split, basically divided between those who thought it was fun and hilarious, and those who have cold, humorless souls sullied by pedantic mediocrity and languishing spiritual misgivings of the heart.
Once you've seen one gremlin create a mess, it isn't really a whole lot funnier to see 100 gremlins doing the same thing.
Wrong!
I don't think there will ever be another movie like Gremlins 2, and that's why it's my final entry on the list. And there you have it, folks. My comprehensive guide to great sequels. Let me know if you think I missed any, and if you feel like it, subscribe so you can find out when I drop the next video about sequels that are absolutely insane departures from the originals, but are nowhere near as good. That's actually going to be really fun. Thanks for watching. Oh wait, I almost forgot. Paddington 2.
Paddington 2 is incredible.
I f***ing told you.